The day she told me I was no longer family. I was standing in the office I had built with my own hands. That is not poetic exaggeration. I had painted those walls myself 12 years earlier, when the drywall still smelled like chalk and ambition. I had assembled the metal shelving units from flat boxes, tightening each bolt while balancing a phone between my shoulder and ear, taking supplier calls. I had swept the concrete floors at midnight before our grand opening because we couldn't afford a cleaning crew. Every corner of that building held my fingerprints. And yet, when she said it, something inside me understood before my mind did. You are no longer family. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The words landed softly, like ash from a fire that had already burned through everything. I remember staring at the conference table, the long walnut slab we had chosen together because it looked established. That was her word. Established. Solid. Permanent. We were building something that would last generations. That's what she had promised when she married my father and folded her children into our lives. Blended family, shared legacy, equal stake. That's what I believed in. That's what I worked for. And that's what she erased in a single sentence. The room was full that morning. Her son, Marcus, sat to her right, fingers steepled like he was preparing for a board vote instead of a funeral. My father sat at the end of the table, eyes fixed on a legal pad he wasn't writing on. Two attorneys I barely knew occupied the far side, their briefcases open like silent witnesses. I should have understood then. Instead, I thought we were discussing expansion. I had spent weeks preparing projections, new contracts, regional growth, hearing plans. I believed we were on the edge of something bigger. What I didn't know was that I was the only one in the room who thought the future still included me. She folded her hands and said my name the way people do before delivering condolences. We've reviewed the structure of the company, she began, calm, controlled. And after careful consideration, it's clear that the original intent has been diluted. Diluted. That was the first word that felt wrong. Marcus slid a document across the table. The shareholders have voted, he said. Shareholders. I almost laughed. There were only 3 primary stakeholders when we started. My father, her, and me. Later, Marcus was added with a minor percentage when he came on full time. I signed the amendment myself. I believed in opportunity. I believed in shared growth. The document stopped in front of me. I didn't pick it up immediately. I looked at my father instead. He didn't look back. She continued. The majority agrees that operational control should be consolidated for efficiency. Efficiency. Another soft word. Another blade wrapped in silk. I picked up the paper. My name was there, so was my ownership percentage. 0. I didn't understand what I was looking at. This must be a draft, I said. My voice sounded steady, detached, as if I were discussing a minor clerical error. Marcus cleared his throat. It's filed. Filed. That word hit harder than the others. Filed meant official. Filed meant done. You can't file something I didn't sign, I said. That was when she leaned forward. You already did. And that was when the floor shifted. The document referenced an amendment from 3 years earlier. I remembered it vaguely, a restructuring during a tight financial quarter. We were bleeding cash after a supplier collapsed. She had insisted we move quickly, reallocate shares temporarily to secure a line of credit. It was framed as survival. I signed. I didn't read every clause. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She had been in my life since I was 19. She told people I was her son. She hugged me at graduations. She cried when we landed our first major contract. She said we were building something for the family. And I believed her. Now that same amendment had been activated, triggered by a clause allowing majority shareholders to reassign operational authority in the event of misalignment with strategic direction. Misalignment. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. What misalignment? I asked. Her answer was surgical. You've become difficult. Difficult. The word echoed. I had pushed back on a land acquisition. I questioned an aggressive loan. I argued for employee retention instead of layoffs. That was difficult. To her, difficult meant disobedient. To me, it meant responsible. You can't remove me from my own company, I said, finally hearing the crack in my voice. She didn't blink. We already have. And then she delivered the sentence that split my life into before and after. You are no longer family. Silence followed, not the stunned kind, the planned kind, the kind that says the script has been rehearsed. I looked at my father again. He still didn't look at me. In that moment, I understood something about power. Emotional loyalty means nothing against legal authority. Blood means nothing against paperwork. Years of sacrifice mean nothing against a clause you didn't read carefully enough. Belonging is fragile. Exile is procedural. I don't remember leaving the room. I remember the parking lot. The sky was too bright. The building looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but it no longer felt like mine. I sat in my truck for nearly an hour. I wasn't angry yet. I was embarrassed. That was the part I hadn't anticipated. Not rage, not heartbreak. Humiliation. The kind that crawls under your skin and stays there. By that afternoon, the emails had gone out. I found out because my access was revoked. Password denied. Keycard inactive. My company phone disconnected from the internal server. Marcus sent a transition update to senior staff. It thanked me for my contributions. Contributions. Like I had volunteered to charity bake sale. By evening, the whispers began. Suppliers called. We heard there were changes. A longtime employee texted, "Is it true you're stepping down?" Stepping down. The narrative was already rewritten. I wasn't removed. I chose to leave. I had spent 12 years building credibility. It unraveled in 12 hours. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at a stack of old documents I had kept in a drawer labeled, just in case. I don't know what instinct had made me keep them. Maybe some part of me had always known trust should be documented. I pulled out the original shareholder agreement. 3 names. Equal percentages. My signature. Her signature. My father's. Back then, the ink had symbolized unity. Now it looked like a trap. Flashbacks came in waves. Her hand on my shoulder at our first ribbon cutting. We're proud of you. Marcus and I working late, laughing over takeout containers. My father telling friends, this will be his one day. When did that shift? When did pride become competition? When did partnership become consolidation? I replayed small moments I had dismissed before. The way she insisted on being primary signatory for new accounts. The way Marcus started referring to the company as ours without including my name. The way my father grew quieter during meetings. The signs had been there. But loyalty is blinding. When you love people, you interpret their ambition as shared vision, not threat. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m, I found the amendment she referenced, the restructuring document from 3 years ago. I read it slowly this time, line by line, clause by clause. And there it was. The trigger condition. Operational authority may be reassigned upon majority vote in case of strategic misalignment, subject to ratified Addendum B. Addendum B. I didn't remember that. I flipped through the folder. No Addendum B. I checked the scanned files on my laptop. Still nothing. My pulse quickened. The amendment referenced an attached addendum outlining procedural requirements for activating the clause. It wasn't there. I read the language again. Activation requires documented performance review, signed by all principal stakeholders. Signed by all. I leaned back in my chair. I had never signed performance review of myself. There had never been one. Had they fabricated it? Or had they overlooked something? For the first time since the meeting, the humiliation cracked and something else seeped in. Curiosity. Possibility. I drove to the county records office the next morning. If it was filed, it would be public record. The clerk recognized the company name. Yes, she said, pulling up the filing. Reassignment of operational control, filed yesterday. Is addendum B attached? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She scrolled. No attachment under that label. Any performance review documentation. She shook her head. Just the vote record and amendment reference. The vote record. I requested a copy. 3 signatures. Hers. Marcus. My father's. Majority achieved. No mention of addendum B. No performance review. My signature nowhere on the activation. They had relied solely on the majority vote, assuming the clause was self-executing. It was. Not according to the language. I walked out of that office with a copy in my hand and something new in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. They had power, but they might not have precision. And power without precision is vulnerable. Back home, I spread the documents across my dining table like evidence in a trial. Trust versus manipulation. Belonging versus exclusion. Emotional loyalty versus legal power. They had weaponized paperwork. But paperwork is only as strong as its wording. I called an attorney I hadn't spoken to in years, Daniel Ruiz. He had helped us draft the original incorporation documents before she insisted on bringing in her own firm later. He answered on the 3rd ring. I was wondering when you'd call, he said. That stopped me. You knew, I asked. I saw the filing yesterday. And I wondered whether they remembered addendum B. I exhaled slowly. So it exists, I said. It does, he replied. And unless you signed off on a performance review acknowledging misalignment, they skipped a required procedural step. They removed me anyway. Removing and legally removing are not the same. That was the first sentence that felt like oxygen. He asked me to bring everything to his office. By afternoon, I was sitting across from him in a room that smelled like leather and old paper. He read silently for nearly an hour. Finally, he looked up. They moved fast, he said. They always do. He nodded. Fast can mean confident or careless. Which is it? He tapped the clause. This language is conditional. It's not self-executing. They needed your signature on a documented review acknowledging strategic misalignment. Without it, the reassignment can be challenged. Challenged? The word felt dangerous. Can it be reversed? I asked. Potentially. What would that take? A formal dispute, a temporary injunction, and what? A signature. My stomach tightened. Whose? Yours, on a corrective filing invoking procedural noncompliance. One signature. The irony was almost cruel. Years ago, my signature had handed them leverage. Now a single signature might reclaim it. But nothing is simple in a family. Filing that corrective action would not be quiet. It would be war. They would know immediately. They would fight. My father would be forced to choose a side publicly. The whispers would turn into headlines in our industry circles. Employees would panic. Vendors would hesitate. The company could fracture. Daniel watched me think. This isn't about revenge, he said. It's about due process. Due process. A colder phrase than family. But maybe colder is stronger. I drove home in silence. The building came into view as I passed the exit. Lights on in the executive office. My office. Or what used to be. I imagined her sitting at my desk. Imagined Marcus in my chair. Imagined them congratulating themselves on consolidation. Did they believe I would just disappear? Did they assume humiliation would silence me? Weakness versus strength. They had seen my loyalty as weakness. They had mistaken patience for submission. I parked across the street and watched for a long time. The sign above the entrance still bore the name we chose together. A name built from both sides of the family. That irony wasn't lost on me. I wasn't erased yet. Not legally. Not completely. At home, I stood over the dining table again. The documents lay where I left them. My signature on the original agreement. Their signatures on the vote record. An unsigned procedural requirement in between. One missing link. One oversight. One opening. I picked up a pen. Not to sign. Just to feel its weight. It felt heavier than it should have. Because it wasn't just ink. It was escalation. It was a declaration that I would not accept exile quietly. It was choosing integrity over comfort. But integrity is expensive. And I had already lost my salary, my access, my daily purpose. Fighting could cost more. I thought about the employees who had trusted me. About the warehouse manager who named his son after me. About the receptionist who cried when her husband got sick and we covered her health insurance. This wasn't just my humiliation. It was about governance. About fairness. About whether power could be seized without accountability. I sat down. The house was silent. For the first time since the meeting, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Belonging had been taken from me. But agency had not. The contrast was sharp now. They had emotional authority over my heart. But I still had legal standing. They had declared me no longer family. But family is not defined by whoever holds the majority vote. Family is defined by loyalty. And loyalty goes both ways. I looked at the corrective filing Daniel had drafted and emailed to me an hour earlier. It cited procedural noncompliance. It referenced Addendum B. It demanded reinstatement pending review. All it required was my signature. One stroke of ink. One decision. I thought about my father. About his silence. Was it fear? Was it agreement? Would this force him to speak? The pen hovered over the line. My hand trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of what came next. Changing one signature could restore balance, or ignite a war that would burn everything down. Exile had been humiliating, but confrontation would be brutal. Still, something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the wounded son seeking approval. I was the co-founder asserting rights. Weakness had served its time. Strength was overdue. I lowered the pen until the tip touched paper. And for a moment, I didn't move. Because once ink dries, there is no pretending. No going back to before. No hopping reconciliation will magically appear. This would be intentional. Deliberate. Strategic. The pivot from despair to action. They said I was no longer family. But they underestimated one thing. I had built this company too. And I had finally learned to read every line before I signed it. The pen pressed down slightly. Not enough to mark. Just enough to feel resistance. The next part of my life waited on the other side of that stroke. And I was done being a race. The pen didn't shake when I finally signed it. That surprised me. After everything, the humiliation, the exile, the silence from my father, I expected rage to guide my hand, or fear, or something dramatic and cinematic. Instead, there was stillness. My name flowed across the line in the same steady script I had used on hundreds of company documents before. The difference wasn't in the ink, it was in the intention. This time, I wasn't signing in trust. I was signing in awareness. Daniel filed the corrective action within the hour. Procedural noncompliance. Activation of clause without required unanimous acknowledgement of performance review. Request for temporary reinstatement pending adjudication. The language was sterile. Clinical. But beneath it was a simple truth. They had moved fast, and they had skipped a step. Now I had taken one back. For 2 days, nothing happened. No calls. No emails. No angry messages from Marcus. The silence felt strategic. Daniel explained why. There's an automatic review period. Once your filing is entered, the prior reassignment is flagged as disputed. Until resolved, certain executive authorities freeze. Freeze, I asked. Financial transfers above a threshold, share redistribution, long-term contracts, it's a safeguard. Power abused meets power paused. On the third morning, my phone buzzed at 6:12 a.m. It was from Carla, our controller. Former controller, technically. Or maybe not. Are you aware that executive transfer authority has been suspended? She texted. I stared at the message. The freeze had hit. I am, I replied. Are you? 3 dots appeared immediately. Marcus tried to authorize a capital move this morning. System flagged it, says dispute pending. I exhaled slowly. Arrogance assumes permanence. Strategy anticipates procedure. By 9 o'clock, my email, reactivated through temporary reinstatement rights, filled with notifications. The bank required clarification. A vendor delayed shipment pending confirmation of authorized signatory. Internal software had locked high-level approvals. I hadn't stormed the building. I hadn't posted accusations. I hadn't called employees into secret meetings. I had simply corrected a procedural breach. And the system responded. At 10:17 a.m., my father called. He hadn't called since the day of the meeting. Did you do this? He asked without greeting. Yes. A long pause. You've complicated things. They were already complicated, I said evenly. You're forcing escalation. I'm enforcing procedure. Another silence. You're hurting the company. No, I replied. I'm protecting it. His breath came through the receiver, uneven. You should have come to us. I tried. He didn't deny that. That was telling. By noon, Marcus called. His tone was different, not calm, not measured. What the hell did you file? He demanded. A corrective action. You blindsided us. I almost laughed at the irony. You removed me, I said, without fulfilling procedural requirements. We had majority. You needed compliance. You're being petty. There it was. Revenge vs. justice. They saw retaliation. I saw rectification. This isn't about ego, I said. It's about governance. You're freezing operations. Then unfreeze them properly. He didn't respond to that. Because he couldn't. By mid-afternoon, Daniel called with the update I had been waiting for. Preliminary review confirms the omission, he said. Addendum B required a documented performance review signed by all principal stakeholders before activation. There is no such document. So the reassignment is suspended pending corrective process. Operational authority reverts to prior status until resolution. I closed my eyes. Reverts. A simple word. But it meant something enormous. Ownership percentage restored. Executive authority reinstated. My keycard would work again. The exile had a procedural expiration date. But reinstatement didn't feel triumphant. It felt fragile, temporary, and very public. By the next morning, industry chatter had shifted. Instead of he stepped down, the narrative became internal dispute over governance. Not flattering, but accurate. At 8:45 a.m., I walked back into the building. Not dramatically. Not with a crowd. Just me, my briefcase, and a keycard that beeped green instead of red. The lobby receptionist looked stunned. I thought, she started. So did I replied gently. Upstairs, the executive hallway felt narrower than I remembered. Tension has a way of shrinking space. Marcus was standing outside the conference room when he saw me. His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be here." "I legally am." He stepped closer. "This isn't over." "I know." That was the difference between us. He wanted dominance. I wanted durability. Inside the conference room, she was waiting, composed as ever. If she was rattled, she didn't show it. "You filed a dispute," she said. "You skipped a requirement. We had majority authority. You had conditional authority." Her eyes sharpened. "You're playing technical games." "No," I replied. "I'm following the document you insisted we sign." Silence stretched between us. Years of shared history compressed into that space. "You're damaging your own legacy," she said. There it was again. Legacy. As if legacy belonged to whoever controlled the signature block. "I built this too," I said quietly. Her expression flickered. Just for a second. That was the first crack I'd seen. The emergency board meeting convened at noon. Advisors dialed in. Bank representatives requested clarification. Daniel attended as counsel. Facts replaced accusations. Clause language was read aloud. Addendum B cited. Absence of performance review acknowledged. It wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. And procedure favors precision over emotion. By the end of the session, interim operational control was formally reinstated pending proper review process, which meant I was no longer erased. But neither were they. Power had not been seized. It had been balanced. Over the next week, the real fallout began. The bank required dual signatures for large transfers until the dispute was resolved. Employees requested town halls. Suppliers sought written assurances. The illusion of seamless control had shattered. And with it, the narrative that I was the unstable element. Transparency replaced secrecy. Documents were examined. Processes reviewed. It became clear that the attempted reassignment had been rushed, accelerated around a pending acquisition I had opposed. That acquisition now stalled. Not because I blocked it, because scrutiny demanded clarity. Arrogance thrives in shadows. Strategy survives in light. Late one evening, my father asked to meet privately. We sat in his office, the same room where he once taught me how to read profit and loss statements. "You embarrassed her," he said softly. "She embarrassed me first." She felt challenged. I was challenging decisions, not her. He rubbed his temples. "You don't understand what it's like to hold everything together." I almost smiled at that. "I do," I said. "I've been holding it together for years." He looked up at me then. Really looked. "You've changed." "No," I replied. "I've read the fine print." The formal review process began the following week. If they wanted to cite strategic misalignment, it had to be documented. Metrics, performance benchmarks, defined expectations. Suddenly, vague accusations had to become measurable claims. They couldn't. My numbers were strong. My divisions profitable. Employee retention, highest under my supervision. The narrative shifted again. From difficult to necessary. The public confrontation came at the quarterly shareholders meeting. Not just family. Minor investors present. External advisors watching. She presented first. Calm. Polished. Spoke about growth and vision. Then I stood. Not to attack. Not to retaliate. But to clarify. "I was told I was no longer family," I began. Murmurs rippled. "I won't discuss personal matters here, but I will discuss governance. Authority in this company is conditional upon adherence to our own agreements. Those agreements protect all of us, not just the majority." I cited the clause. Explained the omission. Outlined the corrective filing. No drama. Just facts. Power, I said, must be exercised with integrity, or it becomes instability. The room was quiet. Not hostile. Not sympathetic. Attentive. When I finished, I didn't look at her. I looked at the table we chose together years ago. Solid. Established. Permanent. But only if maintained. After the meeting, she approached me. Her voice was lower than before. You've made your point. This wasn't about a point. You could have destroyed us. I didn't. She studied me, perhaps expecting triumph. Or cruelty. But revenge had never been the objective. Revenge fractures. Justice stabilizes. You still want to be part of this? She asked finally. Yes, I said, under equal standards. That was the turning moment. Not the reinstatement. Not the freeze. Not the confrontation. But the boundary. Family, if it exists, requires reciprocity. Respect cannot be revoked by majority vote. Over the next months, structural reforms were implemented. Clear performance review processes. Defined activation procedures. Independent oversight for major governance changes. Dual signature requirements codified. Not because I demanded control. Because I demanded fairness. Marcus remained wary. She remained composed. My father remained quieter than ever. But something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the loyal son waiting for approval. I was a partner requiring accountability. Ownership was not restored through force. It was reclaimed through precision. One signature had triggered it, but discipline sustained it. On the anniversary of the dispute, I stood alone in the warehouse. Forklifts hummed in the distance. Employees moved with the same rhythm they always had. The company survived. Stronger, arguably. Not because conflict didn't happen, but because it was addressed. She never apologized for the words. You are no longer family. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe pride forbade it. But she never tried to remove me again. And I never signed blindly again. Family, I learned, is not a title someone grants you. It's a standard you uphold. When someone says you are no longer family, you have two options. Collapse under the rejection, or redefine what family means. For me, it meant this. Mutual loyalty. Transparent authority. Agreements honored fully, not selectively. I didn't win. Winning implies someone else had to lose. What happened was different. Balance was restored. Power was restrained. Integrity outmaneuvered greed, not with noise, but with documentation. That's the part people misunderstand about strength. It doesn't shout. It signs. And signs carefully. The pen that once made me vulnerable became the instrument that reestablished me. Not because ink is powerful, but because awareness is. When I walk through those halls now, I don't feel ownership the way I used to. I feel stewardship. A quieter, steadier responsibility. Belonging is no longer assumed. It's maintained. The contrast remains clear in my mind. Arrogance believes power is permanent. Strategy knows it is conditional. Revenge seeks humiliation. Justice seeks correction. Exile feels final. Procedure can reopen doors. She said I was no longer family. But she underestimated something fundamental. Family is not defined by who speaks last in a boardroom. It's defined by who honors the agreement when no one is watching. And sometimes, all it takes to remind everyone of that is one signature.